Hey, what's up, friends? Today, besides having a great time as always, I'm going to teach you a pattern that you can use in all your games. I've been using it for a considerable amount of time now, and it functions absolutely perfectly. This specific pattern is frequently referred to as the elimination of the guard. You might also find it referred to as the elimination of the sentinel. Now you'll understand why it's called that. Just like in the movies, before going into a place, like to rob it, for example, they always try to take out the guard first so they can go in with much more force, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to demonstrate and explore today in this chess lesson. And I promise you're going to absolutely love every minute of it. We're going to demonstrate it with a truly magnificent and instructive game by Bobby Fischer, where you can clearly see this elimination of the defender or elimination of the guard, right? You can call it whatever you like. The important thing is that you fully grasp and remember this tactical pattern. And thanks to Bobby Fischer, we'll be able to understand it perfectly. It's a game that was played in Mar del Plata in 1960 against the player with the black pieces, whose name was Gadia, Sicilian defense. I'm going to go through this part a little faster. Why? Because they choose to play the most commonly used variation of the Sicilian, which is the open variation, right? d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6 attacking the d4 square, knight to c3 defending it. And here, the use you know, we've studied a lot of different variations here, whether it's the dragon with g6, the classical with knight to c6, and in this game they use perhaps the most popular one nowadays, and also back then, the Najdorf variation with a6, which is known for being the most aggressive line. I went through this part a little faster because we have it well explained on the channel. However, if anyone got lost, they can watch it as many times as they need. The idea is that here, Bobby Fischer always played the same move. Specifically, this move here, bishop to c4 against the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense, is called the Fischer attack. Just at that, you can easily see why it is called that, right? The idea is that nowadays, it's true that this isn't one of the main moves because Black understands perfectly well how to play against it. But back then, there wasn't as much theory as there is now, and this attack was considered quite deadly from a strategic point of view. You will soon see exactly why. Whether you understand this variation or not, whenever someone puts a bishop on c4 aiming at the f7 square and you haven't moved your e-pawn yet, it is a very, very good idea to play your pawn to e6 so that this bishop no longer works in the same way. If we played d5 in some positions, we're actually making a concession to the player with the white pieces, and this bishop is really a beast, right? It's a very good weapon from here because this diagonal, which goes from a2 all the way to f7, is going to be completely dominated by the bishop. Not only that, but we'll also have the d5 square entirely for ourselves. That's why here the player with the block pieces played e6. The move bishop to b3 is completely theoretical, a prophylactic move against the b5 advance, which the player with the block pieces goes ahead and plays anyway. And now, Bobby Fischer castles. As you can see, I'm going through this part a little faster. Even though we really enjoy watching the whole game, let's move on to what's truly important, which is the pattern you need to take away from this video so you can replicate it in all your games. Here, probably the best move is bishop to e7, right? Something along those lines, but Gadia played a move that nowadays is considered a slight inaccuracy, which is bishop to b7, and I'll explain why. As you can see, there's a very strong pressure on the e6 square from both the knight and the bishop. For now, it's not enough to go after it, because this f7 pawn is doing its job very well and defending that pawn properly. However, it's best for this bishop to keep defending the e6 square for now, and you'll see why. The game continued, indeed, with f4. So, do you understand now that e6 is a weak point and should probably be attacked with this move f5? So, if we manage to play f5, pawn takes, the knight or even the bishop could come in through e6, gaining a lot of space and setting up a completely winning position for the black pieces. Could you take this e4 pawn that Bobby Fischer is giving away? Very good question. The idea is that, as you can see, Bobby Fischer understands so well that the weak point is e6 and that he needs to attack it with f4 and f5 that he doesn't even bother to defend this e4 square. The idea is that it wouldn't be a good idea to capture this pawn, whether with the bishop or the knight, because, for example, after the exchanges, we would have a development advantage in pieces. Imagine, for example, knight takes pawn, bishop takes e4. So, for example, a simple bishop to e3, the extra pawn that the black pieces have does not make up at all for the complete development that the white pieces have. And on top of that, they are already castled, so they could place the rook on e1, opening up the lines. That's why here, very wisely, the player with the black pieces doesn't take the pawn and plays knight to c6. If you've been paying attention, you'll know that the plan is to play this f5. This is the first time we remove the sentinel. If we now place the pawn on f5, what problem do we have? That we ultimately find ourselves with a significantly large and problematic gap on the e5 square. Easy. Therefore, first we must eliminate this troublesome knight. The idea is to always try to find the specific opponent's pieces that are causing us the greatest amount of trouble, or the pieces you think are currently the most strategically active and dangerous for our opponent. In this case, that knight was very well placed, so we traded off. Now, yes, we're free to play 5, of course. Taking here would be a complete disaster, because after pawn takes pawn, the king's file would be completely open to rook attacks, queen attacks, and this d pawn would be left totally isolated. And it wouldn't be good news for the black pieces to just sit still either, because then we would capture here and be in a much better position. That's why here they already have to make a strategic concession, which we really like, right? Probably when you see a position like this, all of you who already have a bit more experience understand that this position is extremely comfortable for the white pieces. For those of you who still don't see this as an extremely comfortable and probably winning position, that's okay. That's why we create winning models, right? I'm not going to talk about that right now. All right, so now by having made this strategic concession, especially regarding the d5 square, do you get it? This square is a weak point and a very strong outpost because it can never be attacked by a pawn again. So our work now begins to achieve absolute control over this d5 square. Many of you are probably thinking about the move bishop to g5, and it's a good idea, but it wouldn't be right to play it immediately. You need to keep something in mind, and this is something that often slips by people who aren't used to solving tactical problems, for example, right? At this moment, our e4 pawn is being attacked by two pieces, the knight and the bishop, and it's only defended by one, the knight. So surely many of you are thinking, hey, but bishop to g5, it's true that it doesn't defend the square directly, but it pins the knight on f6, so it removes a defender, or rather an attacker of the e4 square. But of course, it can't move because of the queen, but the queen can move to b6, for example, giving a check, and when the king moves aside, then yes, this pawn could be captured. And even though white wouldn't be in such a bad position, there's no need to give up a pawn. Therefore, it seems much better, for example, to bring the queen in to defend the pawn. Many times you ask yourselves where you should move the queen. In this case, it's obvious. Why? Because we want to defend the pawn and we want to keep the pressure on the d5 square. Since we want both things, there's only one possible move for the queen, and that's queen to d3. And now, if you've understood well, after this bishop to e7, our idea is bishop to g5, not to pin the knight, but to eliminate it. We realize that this knight is the sentinel and the guardian defender of the d5 square. Once it's eliminated, what will we achieve? Obviously, more control over the square, and you'll see that controlling the d5 square is going to be absolutely lethal. The game continues as follows. Black plays queen to b6, check. But that's no problem at all. We can just move the king to h1. Whenever you castle short and advance the f-pawn, you need to keep in mind that the queen can sneak in along this diagonal. Be careful so it doesn't catch you off guard. King to h1, and now, obviously, black, for example, castles. Once they've castled, what would you think about doing here? Because of course you know that in this kind of lesson, right, you can pause the video and think for yourselves. That's my idea, so we can all improve together. The thing is, we have a lot of possible moves, but the most obvious one is the best in this position. Why did we bring the bishop to g5? To get rid of the knight. Chess teacher, are you giving up the bishop pair? Yes, but only temporarily, because now we will be able to place a knight on d5, which will be a knight on an advanced outpost. Basically an octopus, a monster, because it is going to be way too strong. But now, what would you do? Because of course, if we play knight to d5 right away, they could play bishop takes and bishop takes. And even though it's true we'd have a good position, it still wouldn't be that easy to win this. Opposite colored bishops The rook could be placed on c8, putting a bit of pressure on the c2 square. Well, it wouldn't be bad, but obviously it's not the position we're aiming for. So here, how would you play it? Well, obviously the idea is to also eliminate this defender, this guard, but not with the knight, rather with this bishop to d5. Obviously, they have to capture, and if they don't, we will, because with the rook behind, they can't move the bishop away. So whether they move it or not, we're going to manage to eliminate that bishop. The game continued with rook from a to c8. We don't hesitate for even a second because now they would actually have time to move the bishop away, for example, to d7. And then we continue with the move bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, pawn takes c6. And now, if we wanted, we could play knight to d5. What happens then? Knight to d5 might not be the best move in this position. Careful, technically and positionally it's correct, yes, but we would be giving black the chance for some counterplay. And I'm going to explain it to you here because I want everything to be super clear. You can watch this lesson as many times as you need. If we now play knight to d5 right away, the idea black has here is that even though we're attacking the queen and bishop, they can play, for example, queen to d4. And even though this position would be very good for us because we could double these pawns, double these other pawns, in reality, black has managed to get a bit of dynamism that actually compensates them quite a lot in the position. They'll be able to attack with their rooks along the c-file. Well, I might still prefer to play with the white pieces, but it's not necessary to give black this counterplay. And that's why Bobby Fischer, with flawless judgment, plays rook from A to D1. He brings the rook, which wasn't doing anything at all, since this one could come over here and attack, for example, the opponent's castling along the D file. So now, if we were to jump with the knight, if it were our turn again, then queen to D5 wouldn't be possible. Queen to D4 wouldn't be possible because we would have queen takes, and after pawn takes, we could play knight takes bishop, an important in-between move, because the bishop is defending, and when they capture here, we would win the d4 pawn. Not only would we win the d4 pawn, but the d6 pawn would also become weak, and this position would be wonderful for us. The rook from f moves to c8, and now you might be wondering, if I move the knight, they can take on c2. The idea here is, what would you play? Well, we can still play knight to d5, simply because even though we're giving up a pawn, we're attacking something much more valuable, the queen. Therefore, no matter what, they have to waste a move to move the queen. The best situation or the best response for black here is definitely queen to d8, because otherwise we would capture this bishop, doubling their pawns, and this would probably end in checkmate sooner rather than later. Now then, do we want to trade the knight for the bishop? Now, we've successfully managed to plant a powerful knight on d5, a dominant knight that will never, ever, ever, ever be kicked out of there. We have now completely eliminated all of the enemy sentinels. A knight can only be attacked by a pawn, by another knight, or by the bishop of the same color as the square, because this dark squared bishop will never be able to attack a white square. Therefore, if they want to get rid of this knight, they'll have to give up a rook. In other words, we have absolute control of the position. Of course, once the queen is gone, we have to defend this c3 square. Sorry, c2. And we do that with c3. Right now, these rooks are on a semi-open file, but they're not doing anything because they're just hitting the tip of a pawn chain, so those rooks are useless. And most importantly, chess teacher, how do I win this? Because of course, yes, I have a wonderful position, my knight is really well placed, but I just can't figure out how to win this. Alright, the idea here is that we need to use the principle of double weakness. We have a weakness on d6, that's obvious, right? We could successfully capture that specific pawn at some point, but what we really want to do is try to compel black's defensive pieces to go protect a second weakness, so that we can eventually capture one of the two. I'll demonstrate this concept more clearly with actual moves, since that's far more intuitive than just using abstract words. For example, bishop to d7. It's clear we don't want to capture it, and we realize we can create a weakness with these two pawns here. We want to play a4, and that's why the move rook to a1, now that the rook isn't doing anything, is a wonderful move. After c6, a4, we're creating a weakness there. If they capture, we could take with the rook and we'd be putting pressure on the weakness at a6 with two pieces. And we can also bring the other rook over to put pressure on this point here once we get rid of the bishop. And here, the player with the black pieces made a huge mistake, which was defending the pawn with rook to b8. And now try pausing the video to see if you can find the solution and win the game immediately, because I'm about to reveal it right now. The idea is that here you can win immediately with this move that Fischer played, knight takes e7, and black resigned, since after this check they are forced to capture, and now queen to d5 check, you would take the rook completely for free, and with that extra rook, besides the fact that the position is completely won for white, they would be able to win the game without any problem at all. If you want to significantly enhance your vision and understanding, just like the Grandmasters do, I highly recommend that you join Winning Models Now, which is currently available at its special launch price. Remember that everything has been prepared by Grandmaster Mauricio Flores, one of the world's Grandmasters with the best positional understanding. You can see it because most of you have probably read one of his books, right? I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of video, right? More relaxed, explaining everything super clearly, right? So you can start winning more games, let me know in the comments and leave a big like. It's the only way I have to know if you're enjoying these videos and actually learning or not. So I hope you really loved it. Check out Modelos Ganadores if you're not already in, and I'll see you tomorrow, as always, in the next video, friends. Bye!